This video will quote extensively from a current affairs article on Peterson, so hop on over there and have a read if you don't want to hear some of its points from my smooth radio voice.
So this is why this thing that I've said to people has become this crazy internet meme, but that's to clean up your room. And well, I'll tell you a couple of strange things, things that I don't really understand.
How to seem profound when all you have to say has no real value. Make vague statements that are technically right, something like, many moral values are similar across different cultures. Restate such platitudes with as many words as possible, as vaguely as possible, while never repeating yourself exactly. Borrow terminology from many different fields so no one person can see through your nonsense. Make up theories with many intersecting components, again, the vaguer the better. Draw diagrams, a lot of them. Label them Figure 1, Figure 12. Always use italics, frequently, so you sound smarter. Never be too specific. Vague is the name of the game, but if you have to be specific, say it in a way that you can always say you mean the opposite of what you said. Preach, speak, and speak confidently, as if you and only you have the total truth. Never admit that you are wrong, even though you may be, and spin any criticism as either a misunderstanding of what you were saying, or that they're simply affirming what you already said. That's the reason you were super vague in the first place. Talk a lot. I mean a lot. Have air spew from your face as often as urine spews from the face of lobsters. Yes, lobsters urinate from their faces, but you won't see the Jeep talking about peeing from your face being the righteous order of things. Also be a white man. That does help. Jordan Peterson has seen stunning success over the past little while. Some people seem to think he's very profound and has convinced many people to take him seriously. All this is even more interesting when you realize that he has almost nothing of value to say. This becomes very evident after just a basic look through his work. His writings and speeches are confused, pretentious, or just plain bullshit. Now, if this were all really true, then why do so many people think he has something deep and insightful to say? Well, before we figure that out, we have to first take a look at his writings. If they are truly profound and insightful, then Peterson is himself truly profound and insightful. One of the greatest claims around him is that he is constantly misunderstood, as in the Channel 4 interview with Cathy Newman, in which Newman repeatedly put words in Peterson's mouth, confirming the impression to those that view Peterson as profound that leftist media, whatever that is trying to smear Peterson by accusing him of holding beliefs that he does not hold, by not understanding what he is actually saying, quote-unquote. Taking a look at this closer, though, the reason this misunderstanding occurs in the first place is because people, particularly on the left, are trying to pin exactly what he is, where he is ideologically. Where does he fit into the overall scheme of things? The reason this can be so difficult is because he's always so consistently vague that it's impossible to tell what he's actually saying, quote-unquote. The Current Affairs article said it best. As a case study, we can take a look at his 1999 book, Maps of Meaning, a 600-page summary of his basic theories that took Peterson 15 years to complete. Maps of Meaning is about how humans generate meaning. By generate meaning, Peterson intends something like figure out how to act, but the word's definition is somewhat wide. Meaning to Peterson is manifestation of the divine individual adaptive path. It is the ultimate balance between the chaos of transformation and the possibility and the discipline of pristine order. It is an expression of the instinct that guides us out into the unknown so that we can conquer it. It's when everything there is comes together in an ecstatic dance of single purpose. It means implication for behavioral output. It emerges from the interplay between the possibilities of the world and the value structure operating within that world. Peterson's answer is that people figure out how to act by turning to a common set of stories which contain archetypes that have developed over the course of our species' evolution. He believes that by studying myths, we can see values and frameworks shared across cultures, and can therefore understand the structures that guide us. As the author admits, this is already giving Peterson's work a more coherent summary than it actually deserves. What he is saying, if he really does mean many human stories have common moral lessons, is essentially common sense, and no one would consider it to be particularly profound. Here's where the points at the beginning of the video show, though. He takes these notions and extrapolates to the meaning of life, history, law, ethics, and so much more. Let's have a quote from the book. Procedural knowledge, generated in the course of heroic behavior, is not organized and integrated within the group and the individual as a consequence of simple accumulation. Procedure A, appropriate in situation 1, and Procedure B, appropriate in situation 2, may clash in mutual violent opposition in situation 3. Under such circumstances, intrapsychic or interpersonal conflict necessarily emerges. When such antagonism arises, moral reevaluation becomes necessary. As a consequence of such reevaluation, behavioral options are brutally rank-ordered, or, less frequently, entire moral systems are devastated, reorganized, and replaced. This organization and reorganization occurs as a consequence of war, in its concrete, abstract, intrapsychic, and interpersonal variants. In the most basic case, an individual is rendered subject to an intolerable conflict as a consequence of the perceived, effective, incompatibility of two or more apprehended outcomes of a given behavioral procedure. In the purely intrapsychic sphere, such conflict often emerges when attainment of what is desired presently necessarily interferes with attainment of what is desired, or avoidance of what is feared in the future. Permanent satisfactory resolution of such conflict, between temptation and moral purity, for example, requires the construction of an abstract moral system, powerful enough to allow what an occurrence signifies for the future to govern reaction to what it signifies now. Even that construction, however, is necessarily incomplete when considered only as an intrapsychic phenomena. The individual, once capable of coherently integrating competing motivational demands in the private sphere, nonetheless remains destined for conflict with the other, in the course of the inevitable transformation of personal experiences. This means that the person who has come to terms with him or herself, at least in principle, is still subject to the effective dysregulation inevitably produced by interpersonal interactions. It is also the case that such subjugation is actually indicative of insufficient intrapsychic organization, as many basic needs can only be satisfied through the cooperation of others. Oh boy, what a word salad. Now, right away you feel that it's important. It feels almost deep, almost like some sacred text with hidden truths. You may not understand it, but there's a lot there, or so is the impression if we're going by the book's Amazon reviews. Now, he isn't saying nothing. There is some truth to some procedures being appropriate in one instance and not the other. The problem is that, again, this is not a particularly profound idea, so how does Peterson get around this? Well, abstract language. Pad it, and throw in as many syllables as you can. I believe it was Einstein that said, if you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it well enough. That's almost the case here, except it's not that he doesn't understand what he's saying, it's that he's not saying much at all. Vague, unfalsifiable, and hence seemingly profound. Taking a look at another quote in which Peterson gives his theory of law, and I'm sorry for subjecting you to another quote, law is a necessary precondition to salvation, so to speak. Necessary, but insufficient. Law provides the borders that limit chaos and allows for the protected maturation of the individual. Law disciplines possibility and allows the disciplined individual to bring his or her potentialities, those intrapsychic spirits, under voluntary control. The law allows for the application of such potentiality to the task of creative and courageous existence, allows spiritual water-controlled flow into the valley of the shadow of death. Law held as an absolute, however, puts man in the position of the eternal adolescent, dependent upon the father for every vital decision, removes the responsibility for action from the individual, and therefore prevents him or her from discovering the potential grandeur of the soul. Life without law remains chaotic, effectively intolerable. Life that is pure law becomes sterile, equally unbearable. The domination of chaos or sterility equally breeds murderous resentment or hatred. Yet again, what he's saying isn't wrong per se, but it's so obvious and simple that the only thing impressive about it is just how much he complicates simple ideas in order to give off the impression of profoundness. What is spiritual water flow? How exactly is domination of chaos defined? In what way does sterility breed murderous resentment? Towards what? This is less a sincere discourse on law and more just how many metal band names he can fit into this paragraph. Domination of chaos, intrapsychic spirits, shadow of death, etc., etc. Sociologist C. Wright Mills, in critically examining grand theorists in his field who use verbosity to cover for a lack of profundity, pointed out that people respond positively to this kind of writing because they see it as a wondrous maze, fascinating precisely because of its often splendid lack of intelligibility. But, Mills said, such writers are so rigidly confined to such a high level of abstraction that the typologies they make up, and the work they do to make them up, seem more often an arid game of concepts than an effort to define systematically, which is to say in a clear and orderly way, the problems at hand, and to guide our efforts to solve them. Interestingly, a study in the European Journal of Personality titled Openness, Intellect, and Susceptibility to Pseudo-Profound Bullshit, a replication extension, found that Profundity ratings for PPBS, that is pseudo-profound bullshit, a class of meaningless statements designed to appear profound, have been found to be negatively related to analytical thinking and positively related to epistemically suspect beliefs. Interesting. Nevertheless, this sort of grand theorizing, abstract language, and having a thesaurus shoved up your ass is done not to seem cool, but to intimidate you into casually accepting what Peterson is saying. You feel inadequate, maybe stupid even, to approach his work and try to critique it. He clearly wants you to think this, since the book's epigraph is Matthew 13:35. I will utter things which have been kept secret from the foundation of the world. It's almost a joke trying to understand how pretentious that is. He goes further though. In the book, he includes a letter to his father in which he tries to explain just how great his ideas are. I don't know, Dad, but I think I've discovered something that no one else has any idea about, and I'm not sure I can do it justice. Its scope is so broad that I can see only parts of it clearly at one time, and is exceedingly difficult to set down comprehensively in writing. Anyways, I'm glad you and Mom are doing well. Thank you for doing my income tax returns. Big Boy Peterson has ideas that can shred space and time, but needs his parents to do his taxes for him. To quote the article, when someone is this convinced of their own brilliance, they can be unaware of just how far afield they have drifted from the world of sense and reason. The diagrams and figures in Maps of Meaning are astonishing and prove this fact. Just take a look at these. Honestly, as an intelligent human being, please just take a look at these diagrams. How can you even begin to rationally analyze what he's saying? These diagrams mean nothing. You can't disprove it. You can't comment on it, aside from its ridiculousness. You can't begin to comprehend it, even. Why is order a king? Why is chaos a dragon? What does Buddha have to do with any of this? Why is the garden walled? What in the fuck is that dragon doing to its tail? At least I hope it's its tail. If anyone else had made this nonsense, he would be taken for a madman, but no, not Peterson, the philosopher of the millennium. Of course he sprinkles in nonsense Latin because, well, actually smart books have Latin in them from time to time. Yes. Taking a step back, the way he complicates simple truths of life into this overly complicated nonsense of dragons and spiritual waterflow is why he's become a self-help guru. Taking a look at his ending, summary in 12 Rules for Life, what shall I do to strengthen my spirit? Do not tell lies or do what you despise. What shall I do to ennoble my body? Use it only in the service of my soul. What shall I do with the most difficult of questions? Consider them the gateway to the path of life. What shall I do with the poor man's plight? Strive through right example to lift his broken heart. What shall I do when the great crowd beckons? Stand tall and utter my broken truths. Yeah, his truths are broken, alright. As the article mentions, these are pompous biblical ways of saying, tell the truth, be true to yourself, see challenges as opportunities, set a good example, and give confident and long-winded lectures to your adoring crowds of fans. Note the response to the poor man's plight, which is not to help him, but to show him what a better person you are, so he will have a model to emulate. Here you have nothing but a man with simple ideas trying to sound smart, and by extension, make those that work through the nonsense to understand what he's saying also feel smart. A few more Petersonisms from the article. There is no being without imperfection. No shit. You can't make rules for the exceptional. By definition. The future is the place of all potential monsters. The future is the place for all potential everything. People do not care whether or not they succeed, they care about whether or not they fail, which is somehow different, I guess. Life is suffering, that's clear. There is no more basic, irrefutable truth. Anything is irrefutable if it's not clear what we mean by it. And my favorite thing from the article, you cannot be protected from the things that frighten you and hurt you, but if you identify with the part of your being that is responsible for transformation, then you are always the equal, or more than the equal, of the things that frighten you. Unless you are frightened by leopards, and are subsequently eaten by leopards. The funny bit is that the things we criticize him for, abstract convoluted language, long passages about seemingly nothing, plain truths disguised in pompous garb, are his strength. When it's so hard to understand exactly what he's getting at, this is by design. If he wanted to say it clearly, he could have. All his work and speeches come with a "that's not what I meant" flip-flop button that basically makes you out to be a dangerous leftist trying to pigeonhole him, misrepresenting his every position and thus making him always able to take the higher ground. That's not what I mean. I didn't say that. You're nothing but an ideologue. Note the irony. That wants to cage me, the innocent prophet of truth, the crusader of knowledge, Jordan the Christ. Sadly, he has not yet cried, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. The article illustrates this best. For example, he sees the world as fundamentally divided between the forces of chaos and the forces of order, and explains the difference. Chaos is what extends eternally and without limit beyond the boundaries of all states, all ideas, and all disciplines. It is the foreigner, the stranger, the member of another gang, the rustle in the bushes, the hidden anger of your mother. Chaos is symbolically associated with the feminine. Order, by contrast, is explored territory. That's the hundreds of millions of years old hierarchy of place, position, and authority. That's the structure of society. It's the structure provided by biology, too. It's a flag of the nation. It's the greatest of tradition. The rows of desks in the school classroom. The trains that leave on time. In the domain of order, things behave as God intended. It isn't difficult to feel the power worship of what he's saying. Chaos is things foreign, something feminine, tying into ideas of foreigners being intrinsically bad and women being the weaker halves of society, etc. While order is contrasted, and hence is domestic, masculine. What God intends, difference to authority, tradition, hierarchy, flags, Christian fundamentalism, fascism, echoes of sexism. The moment you say any of this, however, and Peterson would rise to the moment, always equipped with his handy, "That's not what I meant. I don't really mean women because the feminine is also necessary. I don't really mean orders with men, it's only symbolic. I don't really mean anything political, despite him literally grouping all of natural history, hundreds of millions of year-old hierarchy, with authority, the flag, the nation, against what is foreign and feminine. It's all unclear, and if asked, he'll only respond with the same nonsense. Take, for example, the way Peterson talks about the threat of physicality.
But here's the problem. I know how to stand up to a man who's unfairly trespassing against me. And the reason I know that is because the parameters for my resistance are quite well defined, which is we talk, we argue, we push, and then it becomes physical. Right? Like if we move beyond the boundaries of civil discourse, we know what the next step is. Okay, that's forbidden in discourse with women. And so I don't think that men can control crazy women. I really don't believe it. I think that they have to throw their hands up in it's not even disbelief. It's that there's no step forward that you can take under those circumstances, because if the man is offensive enough and crazy enough, the reaction becomes physical right away, or at least the threat is there. And when men are talking to each other in any serious manner, that underlying threat of physicality is always there, especially if it's a real conversation, and it keeps the thing civilized to some degree. You know, if you're talking to a man who wouldn't fight with you under any circumstances whatsoever, then you're talking to someone to whom you have absolutely no respect. But I can't see any way. For example, there's a woman in Toronto who's been organizing this movement, let's say, against me and some other people who are going to do a free speech event, and she managed to organize quite effectively. And she's quite offensive, you might say. She compared us to Nazis, for example, which, you know, publicly, using the swastika, which wasn't really something I was all that fond of. But I'm defenseless against that kind of female insanity, because the techniques that I would use against a man who was employing those tactics are forbidden to me. So I don't know, like, it seems to me that it isn't men that have to stand up and say enough of this, even though that is what they should do. It seems to me that it's sane women who have to stand up against their crazy sisters and say, look, enough of that, enough man-hating, enough pathology, enough bringing disgrace on us as a gender.
This seems to be quite clear. He's upset he can't hit women. More specifically, he's upset that there's a social taboo against him beating up the Toronto woman who called him a Nazi. He says that he's defenseless against her insanity because the techniques he would use on a man are forbidden. Because, you know, ignoring people isn't an option, apparently. If you were to mention this, he would, of course, vehemently deny it. As the article says, Peterson would vigorously object to the idea that he's in any way endorsing violence against women. No, I'm simply saying that all human interaction has an underlying threat of physicality. How could you so willfully and unfairly misrepresent me? This is equally funny because I'm a man, and I've had many conversations with men, and I've never felt this underlying threat of physicality. I've had many conversations with women. Again, no threat of physicality. I have had many conversations with people I strongly disagree with. Again, no threat of physicality. Let's move on to another Petersonism. Thank you to Zarin Arsen, Xiaoyan Zhang, Oren Clark, Larry Valdemar Miniilo, Khan, Daryl McFarlane, Comrade Pingu, and of course Charles. Thank you, Charles. If you enjoyed the content of this video, then I suggest you go and take a look at the current affairs article, and some of their other articles. They're pretty great. And that'll be that. See you next time.